Before we start, a quick note about what this channel is and what it isn't. This isn't a recap channel, and it's not a highlight reel. We're here for the parts of Panem that happen after the cameras turn away. The systems behind the games. The contracts hidden inside victory. The lives that keep unfolding long after the anthem ends. Each video on this channel is built to slow things down, to follow the logic the Capitol relies on, the details it hopes you won't connect, and the people who live with the consequences year after year. If that's the kind of Hunger Games analysis you're looking for, you're in the right place. Subscribing just means you'll keep a seat here when we move on to the next story. Now, let's start where Panem always wants you to stop paying attention. You remember the berries. Katniss and Peter, hands clasped, nightlock pressed to their tongues. But before that iconic almost suicide, another tribute collapses in the dirt, with purple stains on her lips. The girl from District 5, Foxface. And here's the real question. Why does everyone remember Katniss's nightlock gambit, but almost no one talks about the tribute who actually dies by those berries first? At face value, Foxface's death is simple. She spots Peter's gathered food, sneaks in, grabs what she can, and makes one fatal mistake. Wrong berries, instant death. The arena claims another victim. You move on. The games keep rolling. But then you remember who we're talking about. This is the girl who treats the arena as a logic puzzle and keeps solving it while stronger tributes bleed out around her. From the cornucopia, Foxface tells you exactly what game she's playing. When everyone else goes for weapons, she snatches a small backpack and vanishes. No showboating, no big kill, no hope of becoming a career-style victor. She survives by never being where the blades are, by turning the Capitol spectacle into a maze she can ghost through. That part matters because it sets up the contradiction that makes her death so strange. How does the tribute defined by memory, stealth, and strategy walk into the single dumbest mistake in the arena? This is where we talk about the central tension of her character. Either Foxface suddenly forgets how to think, or she's thinking harder than anyone else, all the way to her last breath. So we're going to cover three competing theories. First, the accident theory. She miscalculates, doesn't recognize nightlock, and pays the price for trusting Peter's foraging. Second, the suicide theory. She does recognize the berries, realizes she's cornered with no path to victory, and chooses a fast, controlled death instead of being hunted for sport. And third, the smartest tribute theory. Foxface uses the rules of the games and the Capitol's obsession with a single victor against itself, turning her own death into a quiet act of sabotage. Suzanne Collins never confirms what Foxface actually knows. In the books, Katniss recognizes nightlock from her father, then only learns for sure they were poisonous when the hovercraft takes Foxface's body. In the films, the berries aren't even named before Foxface falls. The narrative keeps you at a distance from her mind on purpose. There is a lot to uncover here, precisely because the story refuses to solve the question for you. And that's the reason Foxface becomes one of the franchise's biggest unresolved mysteries. Was she weak, unlucky, or the only tribute who refused to give the Capitol the ending it wanted? If you rewatch the 74th games through her eyes, a different arena appears. One where vanishing, stealing, and dying at the right moment might be smarter than winning. So in this video, we're going to cover every move Foxface makes, from the cornucopia to her final breath, and test each theory against canon details and the subtle choices the adaptations make. By the end, you may not see those berries, or the idea of a victor, the same way again. Why one quiet tribute changes the whole story of the 74th games. When you think about the 74th Hunger Games, your brain probably jumps to the big, loud moments. Rue's whistle, Peter's confession, Katniss with the bow and the berries, At face value, that's the story the Capitol wants you to remember. The tragic child, the star-crossed lovers, the fiery girl who accidentally turns into a symbol. But here's the real question. Why does this same narrative keep quietly cutting back to a red-haired tribute we never even see in a single backstory scene? Foxface is there at the cornucopia, not charging for weapons but snatching a small pack and vanishing. She's there at the careers pyramid, not blowing it up, but solving it as a moving puzzle and dancing through their minds. She's there in the woods, trailing Katniss and Peter's camp, stealing just enough food to live. There is a lot to uncover here, because the game's main plot never centers her, yet the camera and Katniss's narration keep drifting back, almost against the story's will. This is where we talk about why she matters thematically. In a system that rewards brutality and spectacle, Foxface is the tribute who tries to survive by being clever, non-violent, and almost completely invisible. She doesn't court sponsors with romance. She doesn't give the Capitol good death scenes. She treats the arena as a logic problem, and still, she dies. So what does that say about the options the games leave for anyone who doesn't fit Snow's preferred narrative of noble sacrifice or glorious violence? Why is Katniss so fixated on her intelligence, calling her the smartest tribute? Why does the book keep noting her expressions, her timing, her calculated risks? Why is her death not a random mutt attack or a sword to the heart, but directly tied to the same nightlock berries that almost break the games at the end? That part matters because it links Foxface to the single biggest design failure of the 74th arena. If Katniss and Peter are the Capitol's perfect story problem, love, rebellion, hope. Foxface is the system's stress test. She doesn't play like a career, she doesn't play like Katniss. She refuses the clear roles of predator or romantic lead. So how does the arena respond to a tribute whose whole strategy is to slip between the cameras, to treat the games as numbers and patterns instead of destiny and passion? The answer is brutal in its simplicity. The system has no place for her. It either erases her or forces her into someone else's story. And that brings us to the real stakes of her death. If understanding Foxface means tracking every small, precise move she makes, then understanding her final choice means rethinking what winning and losing even mean when the Capitol writes the rules and then rewrites the story afterward. So was that last move a mistake, a surrender, or the sharpest play anyone makes in the entire arena? That's what we're going to cover next. Our angle, accident, suicide, or 4D chess, and why the text won't choose. So instead of rushing to solve the mystery, we need to pause on what the mystery is doing. Our core claim is this: Foxface's death is written as an interpretive Rorschach test. The text refuses to pick a single answer on purpose. Accident, suicide, or 4D chess. Each reading doesn't just say something about her. It exposes something about Panem, the games, and the way stories get weaponized. At face value, the official story is simple. A clever tribute from District 5 steals the wrong snack and dies. End of arc. But here's the real question. Why does a series that explains mutt DNA, sponsor rules, and hovercraft cleanup in painstaking detail suddenly go vague on whether Foxface recognized nightlock? That part matters, because ambiguity here is a design choice, not a gap. So this is where we talk about method. We're going to cover 3 layers at once: close reading of the book text, shot-by-shot breakdown of her movie scenes, and in-universe survival logic. What does a girl who can memorize the career's minefield path in seconds realistically know about plants, risk, and probability? What does her district's role in power and technology suggest about her education? And when you line that up with how the camera frames her in the film, does the oops reading still feel solid? Because the smartest tribute theory doesn't automatically mean she wanted to die. It means her entire playstyle shows such strong game sense that a random lethal mistake becomes statistically suspicious. This is the tribute who avoids the bloodbath, grabs a small backpack, and vanishes. Who shadows the careers instead of challenging them? Who treats the arena as a puzzle, not a battlefield? Are we really supposed to believe that the girl who never takes an unnecessary risk just casually eats unidentified berries from another tribute's stash? That's the promise we're sold versus the reality we're handed. In training and in Katniss's observations, Foxface is coded as sly, quick, and strategic. She turns the games into a logic problem and survives on brains, not brawn. Yet the surface-level explanation of her death is basically, smartest girl in the arena fails snack time 101. That gap, the dissonance between reputation and outcome, is exactly what we're going to pry open. There is a lot to uncover here. In the book, Katniss's limited POV keeps mislabeling Foxface as scared or weak, even as she consistently outplays the field. In the film, background blocking tucks her at the edges of frames, slipping in and out while the camera chases louder tributes. What if that relationship between what we see and what we miss is the whole point? If Katniss is misreading a girl who's playing a different game entirely, then every theory about Foxface's death doubles as a theory about how the Capitol wants you to read a quiet threat. So next we'll stress test each version: accident, suicide, and smartest tribute gambit against the text, the shots, and the in-world logic, and see which ones crack under pressure. What we're actually doing today, and the wild theory waiting at the end, so here's how we're going to untangle that. Because if every theory about Foxface is really a theory about how the Capitol wants you to watch the games, then we need a clean map before we start pulling it apart. First, we strip it down to canon. No headcanons, no "I saw a Tumblr post once." We're going to cover what the books actually tell you about this girl. District 5, the Power District, clever, sly, puzzle-brained, not a frontline fighter. We'll separate what Collins writes on the page from what the film quietly edits, trims, or rearranges. At face value, the movie gives you a skittish redhead who darts around the frame. The text gives you a strategist who treats the arena as one big logic problem. That part matters because your sense of her intelligence lives or dies on which version you're unconsciously using. Then we go tactical and chronological. This is where we talk about every single move she makes in the 74th games, in order: cornucopia, what she grabs, what she refuses, and why choosing a small backpack over a weapon is already a thesis statement about her whole game. The food strategy, the way she raids without triggering the career's mines, how she times her appearances, how she shadows Peter without ever announcing a formal alliance, will anchor her death to the exact timeline where Katniss and Peter are emotionally, who's left alive, what the game makers are pushing on the audience in that moment. So we can ask the real question: does this feel random or staged? Only after the receipts do we get into the three big theory blocks. First up, a full defense of the accident reading. We'll walk through the evidence that she genuinely miscalculates the nightlock, from her visible hunger to what she realistically could know about foraged plants coming from District 5 instead of 11 or 12. Then we pivot hard into the suicide interpretation, the arguments that she recognizes the berries, sees the shrinking odds, and chooses a quick, controlled exit rather than being hunted for sport. Why would a tribute who has outplayed everyone in stealth decide the game is no longer winnable on her terms? And then the spiciest one, the smartest tribute theory. There is a lot to uncover here. We'll test the idea that Foxface is quietly running one of the highest IQ strategies in the arena, rivaling or even surpassing Katniss and Peter in pure game sense. If that's true, what does her death do to the narrative of clever rebellion the Capitol thinks it's selling the audience? After that, we zoom out to adaptation. How do the movie's choices, what shots we get of her stealing, how fast she dies, which reactions we see, nudge you toward accident over suicide or away from the smartest tribute angle entirely? Why would the capital-approved version of events prefer one reading? And finally, we'll end in pure speculation, an alternate 74th games, where Foxface survives longer. Who could she realistically outplay? What alliances might she weaponize? And how would a living, visible Foxface change Katniss's path toward becoming the face of the rebellion? Stay with this one, because the answer might make the real games feel even more rigged. If you think she just messed up, you're our people, so if your brain has only ever filed Foxface under that redhead who ate the wrong berries and died, you're exactly who this channel is for, because we see that moment and immediately go, hang on, why did the tribute who could outthink the careers suddenly forget how food works? This is where we talk about what this channel actually does. On the surface, we're just revisiting the Hunger Games. At face value, it's books, movies, tributes, arenas. But here's the real question. What happens when you stop treating these as YA set pieces and start treating them as a fully functioning political system the Capitol built on purpose? That's the rabbit hole we live in. We're going to cover the lore, the world building, the propaganda, the trauma, and the quiet, weird little choices that never get center stage but completely change your relationship to the story once you notice them. So Foxface is basically our mascot. She's the tribute the narrative barely pauses for, but whose death is literally the dress rehearsal for Katniss and Peter's final act of rebellion. There is a lot to uncover here. When you track her from the cornucopia, where she skips the weapons, grabs one small pack and vanishes, all the way to that final stumble into Peter's nightlock, you start to see how the games are designed to erase a certain kind of threat, not the sword-swinging career, the quiet problem solver. And if you're into this kind of slightly unhinged over-analysis, this is your informal invitation to stick around. No pressure, no big speech. Just, if breaking down a background tribute frame by frame, book line by book line, sounds fun to you, there's more coming. We're already sketching episodes on other under-discussed tributes. The District 3 boy with the mines, Cedar, the morphling who saves Peter, because once you zoom in on them, the Capitol's whole promise of fair spectacle starts to look rigged in a much darker way. Quick pattern interrupt. It's really easy to get lost in theories. Accident, suicide, secret genius, Capitol glitch. But before we start scoring points for our favorite headcanon, we need to do something much simpler and way more brutal. Strip everything back. Who is Foxface, actually? Not the sly one, not District 5 girl, not Katniss's half-formed guess that she's good at puzzles. The next part of this video is going to slow down and rebuild her from the ground up, using only what the text and the film give us. Every on-screen move, every food choice, every risk she refuses to take. Because that part matters. Because once you remove Katniss's assumptions, the question changes from how did she mess up to what game was she really playing? And that's where the berries stop being an accident and start becoming evidence. Meet Foxface, what the text actually tells us and what it carefully doesn't. So before we decide what game Foxface is playing, we need to meet her on the page the way Suzanne Collins actually presents her. Not the fandom version. The canon version, at face value, she's simple. District 5 female tribute. Industry. Power. No flashy parade costume moment, no heart-wrenching reaping scene. Katniss doesn't even know her name. She just looks over in the training center, sees this red-haired girl with a sly, sharp face and quick darting movements, and mentally labels her Foxface. The nickname sticks so hard that for us it becomes her only identity. That part matters, because the narrative is literally telling you you don't get access to who she was, only to what she does. And what she does in training is already weird for a tribute. While everyone else is throwing spears or wrestling, Foxface is at the brain stations. Puzzles, memory games, problem-solving setups. She's not trying to prove she can gut you, she's proving she can outthink you. Katniss notices she isn't strong, she isn't terrifying in the traditional game sense, but she's clearly excellent at patterns and recall. So why does someone with that profile walk into an arena built on spectacle and blood? To us, that's the first clue that she's playing a different relationship to the games entirely. Katniss keeps clocking her, the way Foxface shadows other tributes at a distance. The way she watches the careers training, not to copy them, but to map them. When she approaches the booby-trapped cornucopia supplies, she doesn't brute force the mines. She studies the path, memorizes it, and then tiptoes through, lifting just enough food to survive without triggering anything. You can feel Katniss recalibrating in real time, shifting from odd girl from District 5 inches to this one is dangerous in a way the capital audience will never cheer for. But here's the real question. For a character who clearly has that much going on upstairs, why do we know almost nothing else? There is a lot to uncover here, and most of it is negative space. No cutaway to her family watching in District 5. No mentor scene with advice or strategy. No interview beats where Caesar Flickerman coaxes out a tragic or quirky backstory. She gets no promise of romance, no comic relief, no tears. She's kept at a distance, almost like a moving variable Katniss has to solve rather than a person we're invited to mourn. This is where we talk about design. Collins gives us behavior instead of biography. We see Foxface's choices, not her motives explained. The book never pauses to tell you why she's good at puzzles, or what her district thinks of her, or whether she volunteered. The film doubles down on that erasure, reducing her mostly to silent reaction shots and quick, clever movements. So we're forced into a very specific position as readers and viewers. We have to read her through strategy alone. Every stolen apple, every avoided fight, every sprint through the trees becomes data. And once you accept that the story has intentionally stripped away everything except her game sense, the berries stop being a random slip-up and become a final, brutal test. In the next section, we're going to cover exactly how she moves through the arena, step by step, and ask the question the text refuses to answer for us. What was Foxface really trying to do? District 5. The power plant kids and why that matters for Foxface. So if Foxface's every footprint is data, we have to ask, where does that data come from? You're not born thinking in grids and probabilities. That usually comes from the world you grow up in. This is where we talk about District 5. At face value, District 5 is power. Not glamorous capital power, but literal electricity. It's the place that keeps the fences on, the trains running, the lights in the Hunger Games arena flickering on cue. It's not starving in the way District 11 or 12 is, but it's also not a career factory, no seaside weapon drills, no marble training centers. Instead, you get mid-tier wealth, mid-tier status, and a lot of technical labor. People who run turbines, monitor grids, maintain systems that cannot fail. That part matters because when your whole district exists to keep the lights on, you grow up with a very specific worldview. You learn early that one wrong switch, one misread gauge, can kill you or black out an entire region. Safety protocols aren't abstract rules. They're the thin line between everything's fine and there was an accident at the dam today. So here's the real question. If that's the culture Foxface comes from, does she ever truly make casual mistakes? Think about what that does to your brain. You're trained to see chains of cause and effect, not isolated events. You're surrounded by adults who talk in contingencies. If this fails, that kicks in. If that overloads, you reroute. There is a lot to uncover here, because that's exactly how Foxface moves through the arena. She doesn't just react, she anticipates the system. Reasonably, that also tells us something about her education. District 5 needs people who can do math, read schematics, understand timing, and load. You don't keep a national grid running with pure brute force, so their kids are probably drilled on numbers, patterns, and problem solving in a way District 12 coal kids are not. Suddenly, her performance in training, the puzzles, the memory, the way she navigates the career's minefield by memorizing the pattern instead of muscling through, stops being a quirky personality trait and starts reading as a product of her district. Contrast that with tributes from agricultural or mining districts. Rue knows plants, trees, and natural rhythms. Thresh knows soil and strength. Katniss knows game trails, edible leaves, and which berries kill you because her father taught her in the woods. That's survival knowledge, yes, but it isn't the same as systemic pattern recognition. In a power plant district, you don't just know which wire is dangerous. You know how the whole panel behaves under stress. So if anyone in that arena is wired to think in terms of systems, probabilities, and controlled risks, isn't it the girl from the power district? And if that's true, what does it do to the neat, comforting story that she just, buries her way out of the games? Especially once we map her entire route through the arena and see where the system might have cornered her on purpose. Book Foxface versus movie Foxface. Two different girls in the same arena, and this is exactly where the gap between book Foxface and movie Foxface starts to matter. Because once you ask whether the system cornered her on purpose, you immediately run into a problem. Which Foxface are we talking about? Book first. On the page, Katniss will not shut up about how clever this girl is. In a good way. She clocks Foxface early as the tribute who never goes for weapons, always for information. She watches her shadow the careers, track Peter's foraging route, and slip in to steal just enough food to survive without ever triggering a direct fight. There is a lot to uncover here, because Collins keeps giving you little proof of concept moments. Foxface solves the arena as a puzzle. The minefield scene is the big one. Katniss sees her approach the career's pyramid and realize it's rigged. Instead of brute forcing it, Foxface studies the pattern, memorizes the safe path, and dances through without setting off a single mine. Katniss is genuinely impressed. She calls her the smartest tribute more than once. That part matters because it frames everything that happens later. When Foxface dies in the book, you're already primed to think, wait, someone this careful doesn't just trip over a plant. Now jump to the film. At face value, you still see a sly, quick tribute from some techie district. She darts, she smiles, she steals. But here's the real question. What happens when you strip away Katniss's internal monologue? The movie keeps most of Foxface's smartest moves, but it removes the running commentary that tells you how dangerous they actually are. She's almost completely silent. No district number, no name in universe, no dialogue to establish her as a strategist, instead of a quirky extra. Watch how the career's food stash sequence gets compressed. In the book, you sit with Katniss as she analyzes the mines, then watches Foxface decode them first. In the movie, we mostly jump straight to Katniss blowing the pyramid. Foxface's memorization trick becomes a blink-and-you-miss-it flourish, rather than a thesis statement about her brain. So when she later grabs Peter's berries on screen, a casual viewer doesn't have that mental file labeled, "This girl is absurdly good at pattern recognition." Her death scans as a weird accident, not a potentially deliberate move. This is where we talk about adaptation choices as a kind of soft propaganda. By not naming District 5 on screen, by never having Caesar or Claudius point her out as a threat, the film flattens her into a visual motif. red hair, sly smile, always in the background of the games. She becomes set dressing for Katniss and Peter's story instead of a parallel answer to the same question. How do you survive when you can't outfight anyone? And that's the reason fandom is so split. Book Foxface, narratively annotated by Katniss, screams, "Smartest tribute in the arena." Movie Foxface, mostly mute and unnamed, reads as an odd little casualty of the plot. So when we ask whether her death is accident, suicide, or strategy, we're really asking which version of her you've been shown. And the next step is to line up every move she makes and see whose story holds. The cornucopia test, how Foxface tells you her whole game in 10 seconds. So let's run the tape. You know the cornucopia scene by heart, but Foxface's whole game is hidden in about 10 seconds of it. When the gong sounds, the careers explode forward, straight at the weapons. Cato goes for that massive sword, Clove heads for the knives. Katniss hesitates on the plate, doing the risk calculus we're meant to notice. And then, almost in the background, District 5's girl becomes a red blur. She doesn't sprint for the center, she angles in, snatches a small orange backpack, never breaks stride, and is gone before the camera even commits to following her. No kill, no clash, no dramatic near miss, just entry, acquisition, exit. At face value, that can read as cowardice. She's not arming up, she's not earning screen time. She's not giving the Capitol the spectacle it paid for. But here's the real question. If the cornucopia is basically a live fire IQ test, what is she telling you about her answer? She's minimizing exposure time in the deadliest zone of the arena and maximizing long-term utility. A backpack is food, water, fire starters, medicine, maybe rope. A sword is only useful if you plan to stand and fight. That part matters because the Capitol has trained you to think the games reward aggression. Foxface is quietly betting on the opposite. She's playing a risk-averse strategy in a system designed to punish hesitation, and still beating the field. While other non-career tributes freeze on their plates, panic and run straight into blades, or die trying to drag a weapon a few extra feet, her movement is controlled and pre-planned. No zigzag of fear, no last-second change of mind. She knew before the gong ever rang that she was not a frontline combatant. She was a mobility build. Watch her body language in that shot. She avoids eye contact with everyone. She doesn't shout, doesn't glance toward any district partner, doesn't hover near the careers hoping to be adopted into the pack. From minute one, she's broadcasting no alliances, no glory run, no promise of mutual protection. Her allegiance is to information and movement. She wants to stay unclaimed, unremarkable, unmemorable. There is a lot to uncover here when you compare her to someone like Rue, Thresh, or even Peter. Rue also avoids the bloodbath, but she does it by pure evasion, climbing and hiding. Thresh grabs a single grain sack and retreats, relying on raw strength and territory. Peter heads towards the careers and sells a narrative. Foxface does none of that. This is where we talk about a tribute who enters the same arena and answers the same opening problem with a completely different equation. So here's the question that should haunt you later. If she's this good at reading danger, at optimizing risk under pressure, how plausible is it that she just casually eats unknown berries without checking? Does that really line up with the girl who treated the cornucopia as a timed logic puzzle rather than a brawl? Hold that thought, because when we track her next major move, the career's supply cache, you'll see the same brain at work, and the berries start to look a lot less random. Shadow in the trees, Foxface's stealth and steal survival blueprint. So let's follow her to that pyramid, because this is where we talk about Foxface's actual game. Not the meme of girl who ate the wrong berries, the pattern of a tribute who survives by almost never being where the camera wants her to be. Think about the early bloodbath. The careers are center frame. Kato is roaring. Marvel's throwing spears. Where's Foxface? At the edge of the chaos, darting in, grabbing a small backpack, and vanishing into the tree line. At face value, that looks cowardly. But here's the real question. In an arena built to reward spectacle, what's the safest thing you can do? Become background noise. From that point on, she's a glitch in the narrative. You don't follow Foxface. She flickers across other people's scenes. Katniss spots her once, silent in the bushes, studying the cornucopia. Another time, she's just there, slipping between trees, no dramatic music, no capital commentary. That part matters because the games are edited for story, and Foxface is actively refusing to provide one. In the book, we finally get the blueprint. She shadows other tributes at a distance, especially Peter. He forages, he tests routes, he eats first. She watches, waits. If he's fine, those plants go on her menu. If he gets sick, she's still in the trees, alive. Why risk your own life experimenting when someone from another district will do the research for free? And then we hit the careers supply cache. Everyone remembers Katniss blowing it sky high. But before that, Foxface walks the minefield without ever touching a mine. She's memorized the route the careers take, every safe square in that ridiculous pyramid. We're going to cover this as more than a clever girl moment. It's a case study in her entire philosophy. Let other people do the killing, hauling, and booby-trapping, then exploit the blind spots they're too arrogant to notice. She doesn't steal everything either. She takes just enough that they don't immediately realize they've been robbed. That is, high intel, low aggro gameplay. Minimum footprint, maximum gain. And it doesn't just minimize physical risk, it minimizes screen time. You're not going to get a heroic anthem for girl who quietly pilfered crackers and went away. So why does that matter? Because the Capitol's relationship with its tributes is based on visibility. The more interesting you are, the more sponsors, the more hope you can sell back to your district. Foxface is deliberately uninteresting. No alliances, no speeches, no big emotional beats, which probably tanks her sponsor appeal, but dramatically increases her odds of living long enough for the field to thin itself. In other words, she's playing a game the arena isn't designed to reward publicly. Low aggro, high intel, almost anti-television. Does that make her the safest tribute in the short term, or the most expendable once the cameras need a twist? Hold on to that tension, because when we get to her final scene with the berries, that question comes back with teeth. The minefield heist, proof Foxface is playing on hard mode, so when you're asking whether Foxface's death was an accident, you have to rewind to the moment she walks straight into a minefield and walks back out with snacks. Because if you survive this stunt, random isn't really on the table anymore. This is where we talk about the career's little monument to hubris. That pyramid of supplies at the lake. At face value, it's just a flex. Mountains of food, weapons, tents, all stacked up so every starving tribute and every district watching can see exactly what they'll never touch. But here's the real question. How do you protect that promise of abundance without wasting manpower guarding it 24/7? The answer is brutal and efficient. The Capitol has those reaped landmines around the launch plates, originally meant to keep tributes from escaping. The careers, with their mentor and their comfort with the system, get permission to repurpose them. They ring the pyramid in an invisible grid of explosives. One wrong step, and you're missed on the grass. It turns a pile of supplies into a weaponized puzzle. Most tributes see that and back off. Katniss literally can't decode it just by watching. But Foxface, she treats it as a test. We're going to cover what she actually does, because it's easy to miss how insane this is under game's conditions. First, she stays at a distance, hidden in the trees, watching Kato's boy from District 3 switch the mines on and off and demonstrate the safe route. She doesn't just notice the general area, she tracks the exact pattern of his footsteps, which patches of dirt he avoids, where he stretches his stride. Then she waits until the careers are gone, and then she sprints in. No guide, no markers, just memory. She copies his path step for step, weaving through an invisible death maze, grabs a small armful of food, and retraces the route out, never once hesitating. Katniss is watching through her scope, and she's stunned, not just that Foxface pulled it off, but that she even tried. That part matters because Katniss has spent her whole life hunting, tracking, reading terrain. If she's impressed by your spatial reasoning under pressure, you're operating at a different difficulty setting. Think about the cognitive load here. She's half-starved, dehydrated, sleep-deprived, and knows that a single misremembered stride means instant, unfixable death. No second chances, no oops. Yet she trusts her pattern recognition and her body control enough to bet her entire existence on it for a calculated payoff. Enough food to extend her quiet game a few more days. So when people say Foxface just messed up with the nightlock, you have to ask, does that really track with the girl who could mentally screenshot a minefield and walk it perfectly? There is a lot to uncover here, and this minefield heist becomes a key data point. If she runs mental checks on every square of ground she steps on, what are the odds she swallows mysterious berries without running the same internal protocol? Hold that image of her dancing through explosives in your mind, because when we get to the berries, the relationship between risk, control, and intent starts to look very different and a lot more dangerous for the Capitol. Pattern interrupt. What if Foxface is the anti-Katniss? So hold that image of her dancing through explosives, and now flip it. What if Foxface isn't Katniss's quirky background extra at all? What if she's the anti-Katniss, running the same games on a completely different operating system? At face value, you're told Katniss is the survival expert. Bow, snares, edible plants, her father's voice in her head every time she looks at a leaf. She's wilderness logic, built in the woods outside District 12, with deep emotional attachments that drive every move. Prim, Gale, Peter. Foxface, the girl from District 5, is something else entirely. No bow, no brute force, no visible relationships. She's urban system logic. She reads patterns, infrastructure, timing. She doesn't conquer nature. She routes around people. Look at their core skill sets. Katniss hunts. She tracks, she shoots. She knows which berries mean death because her father taught her. Foxface doesn't stalk prey. She stalks the schedule. She memorizes the career's booby-trapped path, dances through the mines, and walks away with a backpack, while Cato has no idea he's been robbed. That part matters because it shows you her brain is wired for puzzles, not combat. She treats the arena as a rigged machine, and herself as the glitch. And then there's volume. Katniss's story is loud. Fiery costumes, the girl on fire, rebellious three-finger salutes. A staged romance that turns into real emotional chaos. The Capitol cameras adore her because she gives them spectacle and a love story they can cut into promos. Foxface's story is almost silent. No big interviews, no dramatic speeches, barely any dialogue. Her entire games exist mostly in glances, quick movements in the background, a flash of red hair disappearing into the trees. If you blink, you miss her. That's not an accident. That's a narrative choice. Here's the real question. What path is Foxface showing you by contrast? Katniss becomes the symbol of a rebellion she never asked for. in part because she leans into the capital's own language: costumes, romance, public defiance. Foxface represents the path Katniss doesn't take: pure survivalism. No alliances, no political theatre, no attempt to manipulate the capital's narrative. She never tries to be a victor the audience can root for. She just tries to not die. This is where we talk about rigging. The games, and the story we're allowed to see, reward Katniss's visible defiance over Foxface's invisible cleverness. Why? Because one makes better TV? The other quietly exposes the system's cracks. A tribute who can map landmines and live off scraps without ever giving you a tearful confession is terrifying to a regime built on surveillance and story control. So here's the unsettling question. If the narrative had followed Foxface instead of Katniss, would there even be a rebellion? Or would we just watch the Capitol quietly erase its smartest glitch, with no costume, no kiss, and no symbol left behind? There is a lot to uncover here when we line up her silent game next to Katniss's televised revolution and then put those berries back in her hand. Tracking Peter, the foraging detail that breaks the accident story. So let's zoom in on the quietest part of Foxface's game, the way she shadows Peter. Because once you notice that pattern, those berries stop looking random and start looking methodical. In the book, Katniss has this eerie realization. Every time Peter comes back from foraging, certain plants he's picked start disappearing from the arena, not from their hands, from the landscape itself. Someone has been watching his roots, learning what's safe, and then harvesting it later. That someone is Foxface. At face value, it's a clever freeloading trick. Let the boy with the plant knowledge do the work. Then you just copy his homework. But here's the real question. What does that tell you about how she approaches risk in the games? This is where we talk about caution. Foxface isn't nibbling random berries and hoping the Capitol's mutation department took the day off. She's running a controlled experiment. Step 1. Identify a tribute who clearly knows the local flora. Peter, who grew up in a district that bakes with grains and trades with people who gather. Step 2. Watch what he picks. See that he's confident enough to collect it, then only move in after the environment has been tested by someone else's body, not hers. That part matters, because it means she's not reckless. She's outsourcing the initial danger. She doesn't take the first bite, she takes the second wave of supply. It's the same logic she uses at the cornucopia, memorizing the safe path through the career's minefield instead of charging in. She lets someone else trigger the blast, then walks the pattern. So when she stumbles on Peter's pile of berries near the stream, the situation is weirdly familiar and totally new. Familiar because once again she's arriving after Peter has already made a judgment about what's edible. New because this time she hasn't actually seen him eat them yet. She only knows he's gathered them. There's a relationship there, but it's not a guarantee. Why does that distinction matter so much? Because it puts her right on the edge between calculation and faith. Is she trusting that any food Peter collects must be safe? Or is she making a rare, pressured exception to her own rule because the games are closing in and calories mean survival? There is a lot to uncover here when you frame it that way. If her death is an accident, then it's not the mistake of a clueless tribute. It's the failure of a usually airtight system. She overextends her trust in a proven source and finally hits the one thing he misjudged. If it's suicide, then she's weaponizing that same system, choosing the one moment she can step into Peter's shadow and not come back. Either way, you can't ignore this hinge detail. Foxface has built her entire strategy on avoiding untested risk, so why would the girl who never takes the first step suddenly walk off a cliff? To answer that, we have to look at what those berries meant symbolically, not just nutritionally, and what story she might have been trying to write with her own ending. Nightlock 101. what Katniss knows, what Foxface might, and what the arena hides to figure out whether Foxface slipped or jumped, we have to ask a much less dramatic question first. What did she actually know about those berries? Because if the arena is a test, Nightlock is one of the trick questions on the exam. This is where we talk about Katniss. Katniss doesn't stumble into Nightlock by accident. She's been carrying that knowledge since childhood. Her father takes her into the woods in District 12, points at plants, and draws a hard line between what keeps you alive and what gets you killed. Nightlock is in that mental field guide as the worst-case scenario. A plant that looks edible, grows in tempting clusters, and kills you almost instantly. That part matters because Katniss's whole survival style is built on those lessons. In the book, we see how specific that knowledge is. When Foxface's body is lifted into the hovercraft, Katniss spots the berries, the color, the shape, and she doesn't hesitate. She names it Nightlock. She knows exactly what Peter almost did to himself. In the movie, though, the word never drops before Foxface dies. At face value, that makes the berries feel more mysterious, more random, as if only the audience and Katniss later can connect the dots. But here's the real question. Is Katniss's plant expertise normal or rare? District 12 is a coal district, but it has forests, illegal hunting, people pushed into foraging by hunger. You can imagine other seam kids picking up scraps of the same lore. District 5, where Foxface comes from, is different. Power, electricity, industry. Not fields of crops. So why would a District 5 kid automatically recognize a wild plant from some distant forest biome the capital dropped into the arena? On the other hand, we can't pretend tributes walk in totally blind. The capital runs these games every year. They want drama, not 20 tributes dropping dead in the first hour because they ate the wrong leaf. There is a lot to uncover here about the relationship between danger and spectacle. Basic survival training, capital-produced videos, or even whispered schoolyard stories would almost certainly include, "Don't eat random berries. There's one kind that kills you fast." Maybe they don't say Nightlock by name. Maybe it's just, "Those berries. The instant death ones." And then we get to the game makers. They seed the arena with both food and poison on purpose. It's a design choice. Mushrooms, roots, water sources, and in this case, Nightlock. Why? Because it creates tension every time a tribute reaches for something. Nightlock is so lethal and so visually striking that it feels less like a one-off hazard and more like a recurring element in game's history, a kind of infamous trap. So, where does that leave Foxface? Caught in the middle of two plausible realities, it's completely believable that a tribute from an industrial district with puzzle skills but not wilderness roots doesn't recognize Nightlock on sight. It's just as believable that someone this observant, who's clearly studied past games, has at least heard of the berries that kill you instantly, even if she's never seen them up close. And that uncertainty is the point. We can't read her mind, but we can read her pattern of choices. So next, we're going to cover how Foxface actually behaves in the arena around food, risk, and other tributes, and whether her final move fits the accident theory, the suicide theory, or something much sharper. Theory number 1, the accident. Did Foxface just have one bad day? So if her choices are the map, theory number 1 says this square is simple. She slipped. This is the accident theory. At face value, it sounds almost too mundane for a tribute that careful Foxface sees Peter gathering a big, confident armful of berries, assumes the boy with the bread knows what he's doing, and copies the behavior that's kept her alive all games. The core claim is that she genuinely believes they're safe. Here's the real question. Why would someone that observant trust anyone else's food judgment? The answer takes us into the state every tribute is in by that point. Starving, dehydrated, sleep deprived, hunted. You're not a cool-headed puzzle champion anymore. You're a kid whose brain is running on fumes. Even real-world survival data shows that once you hit that level of exhaustion, risk assessment tanks. You grab what's in front of you. And what's in front of Foxface? A boy from the bakery. The Capital has already framed Peter as the one who understands plants and camouflage. We literally see him blending into a riverbank. To a distant, hidden observer, that reads as wood savvy, even if you, the audience, know his real specialty is frosting. That part matters because the relationship between image and reality in the games is always skewed. She's not seeing Peter's inner monologue, just his apparent confidence. There is a lot to uncover here in her pattern. From the cornucopia, she doesn't fight. She grabs a small pack and vanishes. At the careers pyramid, she doesn't test the mines. She memorizes the path another tribute walks and traces it perfectly. Over and over, she survives by copying behavior that has already proven safe. So this is where we talk about how that strategy can backfire. If the original move is wrong, the copy inherits the flaw. On the berries day, Peter makes the first mistake. He misidentifies Nightlock. Foxface, already weakened, sees a large casual haul. No immediate collapse. No cannon. From her usual logic, that's a green light. The games have trained her to assume that if something were deadly, the arena would announce it with spectacle. Instead, the poison is quiet, and by the time the hovercraft comes, it's too late for her, or for a course correction in her thinking. Crucially, the narrative never gives her Katniss's plant background. No father teaching her which roots to trust. No shared plant book in a victor's village kitchen. Her skill set is memory, pattern recognition, puzzles. Perfect for minefields, terrible for botany. If she's from an energy-focused district with no reason to forage, why would she recognize a specific wild berry on sight? Emotionally, this theory keeps her human. She's not a mastermind sacrificing herself or a secret rebel martyr. She's a scared, brilliant teenager who has one bad day in an arena designed to punish exactly that. For a lot of viewers, that preserves her as a tragic victim of the Capital's promise of glory, not a cold strategist. But if everything is just a mistake, why does her death line up so neatly with Peter's error, Katniss's knowledge, and the Capital's need for a tidy narrative? In the next theory, we're going to cover what happens when you flip the script and assume Foxface knew exactly what those berries were. Cracks in the accident theory. When oops stops being enough, so let's stress test this accident idea. Because once you put it next to Foxface's actual track record in the games, oops starts to feel pretty thin. You think back to her greatest hit, the minefield heist. Everyone else sees a deadly perimeter around the careers pyramid. Foxface sees a puzzle. She doesn't just sprint through and hope. She studies the pattern, memorizes the safe tiles, and moves with this eerie, choreographed precision. One wrong step is instant death, and she still pulls it off without triggering a single mine. That part matters because it tells you her entire relationship with risk. She's not fearless, she's conservative. She only moves when she's confident in her calculations. Same thing at the cornucopia. While the other tributes are wrestling for swords and glory, she goes for a small backpack and vanishes. No brawling, no dramatics, just the bare minimum she needs to survive, and then straight back into the shadows. So here's the real question. Does a tribute that cautious suddenly gamble her life on a handful of berries she's never seen anyone eat? In an arena where the game makers have already used food as a weapon, poisoned feast tables, mutations, tracker-jackers, and genetically engineered wheat fields, at face value, the accident theory asks you to believe that the girl who treated every step on the ground like a potential landmine somehow didn't treat unfamiliar food the same way. And then there's the speed. Nightlock doesn't give you a dramatic slow-motion realization. In the text, Foxface eats, staggers, and is gone. No on-page panic. No chance to spit it out. No screaming, no desperate crawl away from the bush. Just collapse. If she did miscalculate, she had zero time to correct it. For someone whose whole survival strategy is constant observation and adjustment, that's a brutal outlier. Katniss's reaction makes it even messier. She immediately blames herself and Peter for picking the berries, Katniss for not warning him. It fits her guilt pattern, and it's emotionally satisfying for us. We get to mourn Foxface as collateral damage of the star-crossed lover's mistakes. But in the same breath, Katniss calls her clever, strategic, always watching. There is a lot to uncover here, because the narrative keeps telling you she's smart, while also asking you to accept a death that makes her look careless. This is where we talk about plausibility. Is it impossible that Foxface just had one catastrophic lapse? No. But the accident theory needs that lapse to revolve around the single most symbolically loaded plant in the entire franchise. The same berries that nearly break the games. The same berries that become a rebellion emblem. Out of every possible way to slip up, it just happens to be those. As we move into the next theory, we're going to cover what it means if that mistake wasn't a mistake at all. Theory number 2, the quiet suicide, choosing a death the Capitol can't script. So if it wasn't a mistake, what was it? This is where we talk about the darkest reading of that scene. Foxface doesn't just eat Nightlock, she chooses it. In this theory, she recognizes the berries as deadly. Maybe she's seen them in District 5. Maybe she's just smart enough to notice that Peter, the boy who can identify plants well enough to frost a cake to look like a rock, is suddenly nervous about a handful of fruit. Either way, she understands the risk. And instead of backing away, she leans in. At face value, that sounds irrational. Why would attribute that clever walk straight into death when she's made it this far? Here's the real question. What does this far actually look like at that point in the games? The field is shrinking, the careers are still armed and dangerous. Katniss and Peter have just been handed a full-blown love story by the Capitol, with sponsors and rule changes bending around them. If you're Foxface, you're watching the narrative close in. There is no path where you become the victor the Capitol wants. There might not even be a path where you get a dramatic, memorable death. Just a slow, humiliating hunt. Remember her pattern up to now. From the cornucopia, she grabs a small pack and disappears. No big kill, no grandstand. At the careers pyramid, she doesn't fight. She memorizes the path, slips in, steals, and vanishes again. She never gives the audience what they're trained to crave: spectacle. That part matters because the suicide theory isn't just about despair, it's about consistency. A quiet, instantaneous death off someone else's food stash is the ultimate Foxface move. Efficient, unspectacular, almost editorially inconvenient. We're going to cover the emotional logic here because there is a lot to uncover. Even the sharpest strategist breaks under a system built to grind down choice. The games are designed so every decision is really the Capitol's. When you run, when you starve, when you fight, when you beg. In that environment, controlling the timing and method of your own death becomes the last free move on the board. Is it hopeful? No. But it's agency in a place that's stolen almost all of it. And that's where this theory turns into a very dark rebellion. The Capitol wants fear, drawn-out suffering, a good story they can replay every year in the recap. Foxface gives them none of that. No chase. No screaming. No final speech about home or hope or a lost sibling. Just a sudden cannon and a body that drops out of the narrative before they can turn her into a lesson. If the entire arena is a stage, she walks off it on her own cue. So what does it mean if the weakest tribute is the only one who refuses to audition for a role in their script? Hold that thought, because next we're going to cover the third option, the idea that Foxface isn't just tragic or unlucky, but quietly the smartest tribute in the entire arena. Would Foxface really give up? The limits of the suicide theory. So if Foxface is secretly the smartest tribute in the arena, here's the real question. Does it actually make sense that she just gives up? Look at her track record. Every single move we see is an investment in survival. At the cornucopia, she doesn't lunge for weapons or glory. She snatches a small backpack and disappears. Later, she shadows the careers instead of fighting them, slipping in to steal food and supplies. When everyone else is playing who can stab who the fastest, she's playing how do I not get noticed at all. That part matters because it tells you her core priority. Stay alive, stay unseen, stretch out her odds. You see it again at the booby-trapped pyramid. Kato's crew relies on brute force and a rigged minefield. Foxface, she memorizes the path. She treats the arena as a system to be solved, not a battlefield to be dominated. For a tribute who supposedly wants an exit, she is putting in a ridiculous amount of effort to avoid dying in extremely efficient ways. So why would someone that committed to survival suddenly flip to suicide at the exact moment the field is thinning and her strategy is working? Timing is a huge problem for the suicide theory. By the time she takes the berries, she's made it to the final handful of tributes. She's relatively well fed thanks to theft. The careers are fewer, one mutt attack, one bad injury, one cannon at the cornucopia feast can completely reshuffle the odds. If you're Foxface, why not ride that chaos a little longer? And remember her district. District 5 is all about power, technology, systems. You grow up understanding that if you can't control the game, you can at least study it. In that context, there is a lot to uncover here. Even if she privately thinks she'll never be a victor, simply staying alive as long as possible still has value. More days alive means more information. How the arena responds, what triggers the game makers use, how other tributes behave under pressure. For a mind trained to analyze, extending your time in the games is its own form of resistance. At face value, the suicide reading sounds powerful. It turns Foxface into a tragic symbol of hopelessness, a girl who sees through the Capitol's promise and opts out. But here's the real question. Where's the textual support for that level of despair? We never get her inner monologue. We never hear her say she's done. The books give us no explicit suicidal ideation from her at all. Everything in that theory is inference stacked on more inference. Meanwhile, the concrete evidence we do have shows relentless, quiet adaptability, stealing, hiding, tracking, calculating. This is where we talk about risk. Does the suicide theory actually explain more, or does it flatten her into a single sad gesture because it feels thematically neat? Because if Foxface isn't giving up, then we're left with a much sharper, more uncomfortable possibility about those berries. And that's where we're going next. Pattern interrupt. What if Foxface was trying to win a different game? So, if Foxface isn't giving up, what if she isn't even playing the same game you think she is? Here's the real question. What does winning actually mean in an arena that the Capitol scripts, edits, and sells back to the districts as entertainment and warning at the same time? Survival is one version, becoming a victor, getting a house, securing food for your district. That's the official promise. But there are other versions, keeping someone else alive, gathering information, or quietly breaking the story the Capitol wants to tell. This is where we talk about District 5. Power, systems, infrastructure. These are the people who keep the lights on for the games themselves. So, what happens if you drop a systems thinker into the arena? Someone who doesn't just see trees and rocks and mutts, but inputs, outputs, patterns. At face value, Foxface looks weak. No swordplay showcase, no career pack, no big emotional backstory. But watch what she actually does. She shadows, she observes, she stress tests the system. Rewatch the cornucopia. She doesn't lunge for weapons. She grabs a small backpack and vanishes. Later, with the career's booby-trapped pyramid, she doesn't brute force the mines. She memorizes the path from a distance, and ghosts in, takes just enough food to survive, and leaves the spectacle intact. That part matters because it tells you what she's optimizing for. Not kills, not screen time, data, options. Another day in the arena without becoming a main character in the Capital's narrative. So why keep such a low profile? Because the Capital can't turn what it can't frame. A heroic last stand? That's a propaganda reel. A tragic love story? That's a rating spike. But a tribute who never yells, never performs, never gives them a clean arc. She becomes a glitch in the edit. A rumor more than a character, her low-kill, low-drama strategy might be less about fear and more about control, denying the Capital the emotional footage it needs to deepen the relationship between the games and the audience. Now pivot to the berries. What if, for Foxface, the choice isn't life versus death, but control versus submission? If she recognizes the pattern, the boy from 12 with mysterious food, the way the cameras linger on him, the Capital's hunger for a poetic twist, then stepping into that moment isn't just a mistake or a collapse. It's a move the game makers can't easily spin into courage or romance. It's abrupt, it's confusing, it raises more questions than it answers. And that's where the third theory comes in. Maybe Foxface is the smartest tribute in the arena, not because she outlives everyone, but because she understands the rules well enough to bend them in subtle ways. So is her death a blunder, or a final precise move in a completely different game? In the next section, we're going to cover what her scene-by-scene choices actually reveal. Theory number 3, the smartest tribute. Foxface as the arena's invisible hacker, so if Theory 3 says Foxface is secretly the sharpest player on the board, we have to start with a simple question. What game is she actually playing? Because at face value, she's not winning the spectacle. She's not racking up kills. She's not giving the Capital a storyline. She's doing the opposite. Her entire strategy is about disappearing, minimize visibility, outsource risk, exploit everyone else's blind spots. That's the core of the smartest tribute theory. Foxface isn't trying to dominate the arena, she's trying to slip through its code. And her death, in this lens, it's either one rare miscalculation in an otherwise airtight system, or a final deliberate move that still follows her rules. So what does that system look like in practice? You watch the cornucopia, everyone else sprints for weapons and glory. Foxface darts in, grabs a small backpack, and vanishes. No showboating, no overreach. She optimizes the open in chaos. Maximum gain, minimum exposure. That part matters because it tells you her priority from second one. Survival over status. Then you get the minefield. The careers turn the supplies into a bomb. Most tributes either stay away or die trying. Foxface does something else. She studies, memorizes the pattern, and walks the path without triggering a single mine. She's not just clever with facts, she's reading the system. Where are the gaps? Where does the Capital assume no one will be patient enough or calm enough under pressure to do this? From there, it's resource theft, Peter tracking, total avoidance of direct conflict. She shadows, she steals, she leaves other tributes to do the loud, bloody work. You almost never see her start an interaction. She's treating every other player as a moving supply crate and every fight as free information she doesn't have to pay for in blood. There is a lot to uncover here about what intelligence means in the games. Because here's the real question. Is smart just knowing which plants are safe? Or is it understanding how the entire arena behaves? The game makers push with mutts and fire. The careers guard the cornucopia. The Capitol edits together a narrative of bold moves and tragic deaths. Foxface quietly refuses to participate in that relationship. She's a victor candidate who never gives them a clean storyline. This is where we talk about Foxface as a kind of soft hacker. She doesn't break rules, she bends them. She uses the blind spots the Capitol built into its own promise of entertainment. No big alliances, no heroic speeches, just constant exploitation of the spaces no one is watching, which leaves the key question this theory has to answer. If she's that aware, that systematic, what was she doing in the moment she picked up those berries? Was she glitching out of her own code or executing the final line? In the next section, we're going to cover exactly what outcome she might have been aiming for, reconstructing the berries moment, second by second in Foxface's shoes. So let's drop into that clearing and run the berries scene second by second, but from her angle, not Katniss's. Because at face value, it looks simple. Girl sees berries, girl eats berries, girl dies. But here's the real question. What does that moment look like when you are Foxface, starving, hunted, and built to solve puzzles, not swing swords? Physically, the setup is already weird. Peter has been foraging all day, collecting a mix of safe berries and a deadly nightlock in the same container. He's proud of himself. He's talking about how he's finally pulling his weight. And then he does the unthinkable in the games. He leaves the stash. No trap. No camouflage. Just a neat pile of carefully gathered berries sitting in a bag while he and Katniss wander off to hunt. Now imagine your Foxface moving through the trees the way you always do. Silent, watching, never committing until you've read the whole board. You spot Peter and Katniss leaving their camp. You wait. You see where he sets the container down. And when the coast is clear, you slip in. What do you actually see? Not a random scatter on the forest floor. Not a game maker gift descending on a parachute. A full, deliberate cache in a carried vessel. Someone has spent time and energy on this. That part matters because of what she already knows. She's seen Peter forage successfully before. She's watched him and Katniss stay fed while other tributes wither. In a world where food is the currency of survival, Peter, of all people, has become a semi-reliable supplier. At the same time, she also knows the arena's language. Unattended resources are usually traps. The career's pyramid, the cornucopia bloodbath. Nothing free is ever actually free. Except this doesn't look like the Capitol's work. No explosives. No dramatic placement. No sponsor theatrics. This is where we talk about probability. What's more likely in her internal math that the game makers carefully planted a lethal berry right into Peter's path, and he never noticed, or that the boy who's been successfully foraging simply continued successfully foraging. So you can almost hear the calculations. If she walks away, she keeps her perfect record of not taking direct risks, but she may starve. If she eats, she risks poison, but from a source that has, so far, kept 2 tributes alive. How many days has she gone without a real meal? How much hope does she have that another opportunity, this clean, will appear before her body gives out? And then there's the darker branch of that decision tree. What if she does recognize nightlock, or at least suspects it? Is she testing Peter's skill, gambling that if he lives, the berries must be safe? Is she taking a controlled way out, rather than waiting to be cornered by careers or mutts? Or is she, in one final move, inserting herself into the capital's ending, tying her fate to the star-crossed lover's berries in a way no one can edit out. From her point of view, that handful could be a rational survival gamble or a deliberate step into known danger. The relationship between those two readings is where the mystery lives. And the next question is brutal. What do her exact movements in that scene tell us about which path she chose? Did she recognize Nightlock? The case for yes and the case for no. So let's zoom in on that handful of berries and ask the uncomfortable thing. Did Foxface know exactly what they were or not? Because here's the real question. If we can't read her mind, can we at least read the arena around her? Start with the case for yes. Nightlock isn't some obscure moss growing behind a rock. In Katniss's world, it's infamous enough that her father specifically warns her, these will kill you before they reach your stomach. If that's common forest knowledge in a coal district with barely any green space, what are the odds no one in District 5 ever mentioned it? Even if they're not farmers, they still send kids into the games. Parents trade stories, mentors prep tributes. Death plants with a reputation tend to travel. Then you add Foxface's whole playstyle. She survives by watching. She memorizes the career's minefield pattern at the cornucopia without touching a single tile. She shadows other tributes' routes, copies their foraging, and only takes what she's seen someone else survive. If there's a plant everyone consistently ignores, or if a mentor once muttered, "Don't touch the glossy purple berries," she's the tribute most likely to notice and file it away. And that part matters because of how she falls. No scream, no flailing, no look of betrayal toward Peter. She bites, she stiffens, she drops. At face value, that could be read as someone who understood exactly how fast this would go. Almost a controlled shutdown. But now we flip it. The case for no is just as strong and maybe darker. District 5 is power, not agriculture. Their kids grow up around turbines and transformers, not orchards. Katniss has explicit plant training from her father. We never get a single textual hint Foxface studied herbs or poisons. On screen and on page, her food strategy is clear. Don't learn the plants, learn the people. She lets the careers and Peter do the foraging homework, then audits their work by stealing. If that's her system, the Nightlock moment could be the first time it fails. Peter, the baker's son, misidentifies the berries. She sees a proven food source because he's still alive. She grabs some, planning to ration them out, and the games cash in on one bad assumption. This is where we talk about the game makers. If Nightlock is a known hazard in Panem, they don't need to spotlight it with trumpets. They just scatter it as environmental background, trust in fear and local knowledge to keep most tributes away. Maybe several mentors warn their kids. Maybe District 5's mentor doesn't. One missing conversation, one distracted prep session, and Foxface becomes the unlucky data point in the Capitol's experiment. And hovering above all of this is narrative economy. Suzanne Collins knows exactly how to answer a question when she wants to. She gives us Katniss's plant book, the hovercraft confirmation, the name Nightlock. She never ever tells us what Foxface knew. There is a lot to uncover here, but that silence feels deliberate. It lets you decide whether her death is tragic accident, quiet suicide, or something in between. So no, we can't definitively solve the recognition question, but the smartest tribute theory doesn't actually depend on a clean yes or no. It depends on how she handles uncertainty. Does she misread the signal, or does she weaponize it? And to answer that, we have to slow the scene way down and track every move she makes in her final day. Foxface is risk math, when a genius gambles with her own life. So let's slow this way down and put you in her head for a second. You're Foxface. You're starving. You're watching Peter casually snacking on mystery berries that may or may not kill you. Here's the real question. What's the actual worse risk? Certain slow starvation now, or a non-zero chance of poisoning later? This is where we talk about probability, not drama. At face value, the choice feels emotional. Food equals hope, berries equal danger. But in survival situations, your brain quietly runs the numbers. How many days can you last on your current calories? How often have you seen Peter eat these without dropping dead? How many other food sources are left in the arena? You don't get a lab. You don't get time to run experiments. You get a moving target and incomplete information. And Foxface has a track record with exactly this kind of problem. Think back to the careers minefield around the pyramid. Everyone else sees chaos and instant death. She sees a pattern. She studies, memorizes, and then literally dances through a lethal zone because she believes her memory makes the risk acceptable. One wrong step, and she's blown to pieces. She does it anyway, so why should the berries be any different? From her perspective, this could be another minefield, high risk, high reward, but navigable if you read the pattern. Peter's apparent confidence becomes data. He's eating them. He's alive. He's the baker's son, used to recognizing plants for decoration and food. Is that a guarantee? No. But it's a signal. That part matters, because in the games, even the smartest tribute can't avoid gambles forever. The arena is designed to strip away safe options until all you have left are different flavors of danger. You either accept some risk, or you quietly die in a tree with perfect caution and an empty stomach. From that angle, trusting Peter's relationship with those berries might literally be her best available option. Now zoom out to a systems perspective. Imagine her strategy as a series of rational bets. Shadow the careers, low visibility, decent payoff. Steal from the cornucopia after the bloodbath, medium risk, huge payoff. Follow Peter's food trail and copy his choices. Risky, but potentially game-saving. A rational strategy can still produce a catastrophic outcome. A chess grandmaster can lose to a rare but valid counterplay, and it doesn't mean every move before that was stupid. So was her death a mistake, or just the low probability bad roll of a smart plan? That's where the accident versus intent line starts to blur, because Foxface's genius doesn't make her infallible. It makes it very unlikely she died from random carelessness. Whether she misread the signal or deliberately pushed the odds, there is a lot to uncover here about what she thought would happen when those berries hit her tongue. And to get there, we have to watch her final approach to Peter's stash, frame by frame, and ask, what exactly was she trying to achieve? How much is this Peter's fault? The uncomfortable responsibility question. When you slow that approach down frame by frame, something awkward comes into focus. Foxface doesn't just stumble into death. She walks into a trap that Peter accidentally built for her. This is where we talk about responsibility, and it gets uncomfortable fast. At face value, Peter is doing something sweet and very on brand for him. He's gathering berries, trying to keep them both fed, trying to contribute now that he's injured and slower in direct combat. He misidentifies, or at least fails to recognize, the nightlock. He collects them, mixes them in with the safe food, and then leaves that stash essentially unattended. In an arena where every calorie is currency, that's not just lunch. That's bait. And Foxface, whose entire game strategy is built on shadowing, stealing, and never engaging, does exactly what she's trained herself to do. She follows. She watches. She slips in, takes just enough to survive, and slips out. The relationship here is brutal. Her greatest strength intersects perfectly with his blind spot. One misread plant, one shared arena, and suddenly their survival strategies are fatally incompatible. Katniss understands this instantly. The second she sees Foxface's body, she doesn't think, oh, Foxface messed up. She thinks she's dead because of Peter's berries. There's that flash of horror, not just at the death, but at the realization that the boy who throws bread to starving strangers has now unintentionally poisoned a girl he never even meant to fight. That part matters because it shows us guilt landing before intent can even be processed. But here's the real question. How much of that is moral responsibility and how much is narrative responsibility? Peter never intends harm. There's no malice, no plan. From a moral standpoint, you can argue he's guilty of ignorance, not murder. Yet in pure cause and effect terms, his mistake directly leads to Foxface's death. The story acknowledges this for about a page, and then folds it neatly into the Katniss-Peter arc. Her death becomes a lesson about his goodness, her fear of losing him, their odds of winning. So how does the capital audience read this? To them, it's a twist. A clever callback to the promise of danger in every leaf and berry. Another "you never know what will kill you" moment to keep the ratings high. Why ask whether Peter feels responsible when you can cut to a commentator marveling at the irony of the girl who outsmarted the careers getting taken out by a snack? And this is where Foxface's narrative invisibility hits hardest. Even in death, her story is absorbed into someone else's. She's not framed as a tragedy of misaligned survival strategies. She's a plot beat in the Peter-Katniss romance and a spike in capital viewership. There is a lot to uncover here, because that erasure does two things at once. It makes her the ultimate victim of the game's storytelling machine, or, if she understood exactly how little space she'd be allowed, the one person who manages to slip through its net by leaving us with a death no one can fully explain. And if Peter unintentionally authored that moment, what does that say about who really controls the story of a victor and who just disappears between edits? Katniss's blind spot. How our POV might be misreading Foxface. So here's the uncomfortable twist in all of this. Everything we think we know about Foxface, it's coming through one filter. Katniss Everdeen's brain, and Katniss, at this point in the games, is sleep-deprived, starving, concussed, and being hunted on live television. Not exactly the calm, objective biographer of District 5's female tribute. At face value, the narrative feels trustworthy because Katniss is observant. She notices snares, tracks, edible plants, so when she looks at Foxface and decides, sly, clever, sly grin, we tend to nod along. But here's the real question. How much of that is Foxface and how much of that is Katniss projecting a story onto a stranger she never speaks to once? This is where we talk about the nickname itself. Foxface is not her name. It's branding Katniss invents on the spot. She does this a lot. The boy from District 1, the red-headed Avox, even calling Peter the boy with the bread for years. It's a coping mechanism and a narrative shortcut. You turn people into symbols so you don't have to hold their full humanity in your head while you're trying not to die. There is a lot to uncover here when you remember Katniss's track record with other tributes. She completely misses Peter's acting with the careers, only realizing later how deep his strategy went. She underestimates Rue at first, then discovers this 12-year-old can move through trees, set fires, and signal with mockingjays better than most adults in her district. If Katniss can misread the boy she's in love with and the ally she grows to adore, what are the odds she's nailing the inner life of a girl she only ever sees at a distance? Think about the berries scene itself. Katniss instantly decides it's an accident. Foxface must have been so desperate for food, she stole without checking. That explanation is neat. It's painless. It keeps Foxface in the smart but not that smart box. But why does Katniss accept it so fast? Why no real interrogation of the possibility that Foxface recognized Nightlock and chose a controlled death instead of being hunted down for sport? That part matters because Katniss knows what it feels to be cornered by the Capitol's rules, to see the games closing in with no good options. If Foxface chose death on her own terms, that's a decision Katniss might understand too well. Calling it an accident lets her keep some distance from a choice that mirrors her own later rebellion with the double suicide threat. Once you decenter Katniss's POV, Foxface stops being a quirky side character who slipped up and starts to look opaque. Her moves in the arena become harder to pin down to one motive. Is she reckless or meticulous? Terrified or defiant? The truth is, from our position in Katniss's head, we can't prove any single clean explanation. So if Foxface is a mystery partly because Katniss needs her to be one, what happens when we go back through every scene and read Foxface as the primary strategist instead? Foxface versus the careers, the invisible threat the Capitol can't sell. If you want to see how broken the games really are, you don't start with Katniss. You put Foxface next to the careers, because the careers are the Capitol's dream product. At face value, they're the perfect tributes. Trained from childhood in those career districts, volunteering on Reaping Day, bodies built for combat. Weapons practically an extension of their arms. They move in a tight alliance. They laugh while they kill. They perform dominance for the cameras. That part matters because this is exactly what the Capitol wants the games to look like. A violent talent show where aggression equals entertainment. You can see the relationship between them and the audience. Cato, Clove, Marvel, Glimmer. They're walking trailers for the Capitol's promise that if you embrace the system, if you train your children for slaughter, you might get glory. Big weapons, big speeches, big deaths. The game makers design arenas to reward that. Central cornucopia bloodbaths, sponsor gifts for flashy fighters. The message is clear: be visible or be disposable. And then there's Foxface. From the first seconds at the cornucopia, she opt-outs of the script. No sword, no bow, no heroic charge. She darts in, grabs a small pack, and vanishes. Throughout the games, she stays unarmed, solitary, non-confrontational. She shadows other tributes instead of confronting them, steals food instead of winning it in combat, and refuses to give the audience those satisfying kill shots or dramatic showdowns. Here's the real question. How do you sell a tribute who specializes in not being seen? This is where we talk about the glitch in the system angle. The games are engineered to reward visible aggression and punish quiet survival. You get sponsors by bleeding on camera, not by memorizing a path through landmines and slipping in to steal from the career stash. Yet Foxface survives deep into the games on nothing but stealth, timing, and game sense. She's proof that the smartest victor candidate wouldn't necessarily be the most watchable one. And that is a problem for television. Imagine she makes it to the final 3, or even the final 2, standing next to Cato or Katniss with no weapon, no vendetta, no big speech for Caesar Flickerman. What does the Capitol do with a climax where one of the last tributes refuses to play the role of warrior? There is a lot to uncover here, but the short version is they'd almost certainly have to engineer something. A mutt attack tailored to flush her out, a rigged feast, a natural disaster that forces her into a spectacular death. Quiet competence doesn't trend. So when she exits early-ish via nightlock, whether you read it as accident or intent, it conveniently removes the least televisual, most system-breaking tribute before she can really embarrass the design. The Capitol gets the drama of Katniss's berries later, without having to explain the girl who already broke their rules by surviving too well in silence. Which raises a darker question. If Foxface is a glitch, what happens when you imagine her as someone who understands the code she's breaking? Foxface versus Katniss and Peter, 3 ways to break or obey the rules. So if Foxface is a glitch in the code, What does she look like next to the two tributes who basically DDoS the whole system? Katniss and Peter break the games by turning themselves into a love story. Foxface breaks them by refusing to be a story at all. This is where we talk about performance. Katniss and Peter's whole survival strategy becomes a relationship speedrun. At face value, it's pure spectacle, star-crossed lovers, tragic cave kisses, the promise of a double suicide. But here's the real question. Why does that work so well on the Capitol? Because the games already want romance, hope, and drama. They're feeding the script back to the people who wrote it, just turned up to 11. We're going to cover how sharp that move actually is. Together, they weaponize the Capitol's hunger for narrative. Peter's confession on Caesar's stage, Haymitch coaching Katniss to sell the romance, the sponsors sending soup when she kisses him. Every beat says, if you want this story, you have to keep us both alive. By the time we reach the berries, they've stretched the script so far that the only way to preserve the show is to break its core rule. There can be two victors. Now put Foxface next to that. She doesn't flirt, monologue, or give us a tragic backstory. She barely gives the cameras a reaction shot. From the cornucopia, she snatches a small backpack and vanishes. At the careers pyramid, she doesn't charge in. She memorizes the path, ghosts through the mines, and slips away with just enough food. There is a lot to uncover here, because she's playing a game the Capitol can't broadcast without admitting how fragile their design really is. Katniss and Peter overperform the script until it snaps. Foxface underperforms it until she almost ceases to exist. One path says, fine, I'll be your hero, but on my terms. The other says, I refuse to be your hero, your villain, or your comic relief. Which is more dangerous to a propaganda machine? The rebel it can villainize, romanticize, and eventually martyr? Or the outlier it can't turn into a story at all? That part matters, because propaganda needs characters. Snow can replay Katniss's defiance, twist it, threaten the districts with the consequences. He can put Peter on a hijacked interview couch and turn him into a cautionary tale. But what does he do with a tribute who spent the games as a background process? No alliances, no speeches, no clear relationship to sell. Just a girl from District 5 who kept not dying on screen. And here's the uncomfortable implication. The series itself sidelines that third path. We don't get Foxface's name, her district home, her reason for being so good at puzzles. Because if we followed her too closely, we'd have to ask how many people in Panem are quietly refusing the roles the Capitol offers, not with grand gestures, but with almost invisible disobedience. So what happens when that almost invisible disobedience runs straight into the nightlock? The game maker's perspective. Was Foxface a problem to be solved? So what happens when that almost invisible disobedience runs straight into the nightlock? To answer that, you have to leave the forest and step into the control room. Picture it. A circular wall of screens, every tribute on a different feed, betting odds updating in real time. Capitol commentators screaming for drama. The game makers don't just watch the games, they curate them. Their job isn't fairness, it's ratings. And from that perspective, Foxface is a problem, not a prodigy. At face value, she's dead air. No big kills, no tearful alliances, no tragic backstory packages. She doesn't monologue to the cameras. She doesn't give the Capitol a clear relationship to latch onto. She just avoids. For a system built on blood and spectacle, that part matters because a tribute who refuses to participate in obvious conflict quietly breaks the promise the Capitol sells, that the arena will always deliver. So what do you do as a game maker when a tribute keeps slipping out of your story? You start turning the screws. We're going to cover the flashy stuff first, the fires that drive Katniss toward the careers, the mutations at the cornucopia, the surprise weather shifts that herd tributes into the same quadrant. Those aren't random, they're tools, and Foxface, more than almost anyone, keeps ghosting those tools. She shadows the careers without joining them. She steals just enough food to survive without triggering a confrontation. She memorizes the safe path through the booby-trapped pyramid instead of trying to break it. Every time the arena tries to funnel tributes together, she finds the side corridor. If you're in that control room, you start asking a very different question. Is she clever, or is she undermining the entire broadcast by refusing to give you a moment? This is where we talk about escalation. Once a tribute becomes a narrative blind spot, the game makers have options. More tracker-jacker nests in the quiet zones, fog banks that force everyone into the open, subtle food scarcity in the regions she favors. You don't need to target her directly. You just design events that someone with her pattern almost can't avoid. There is a lot to uncover here, because the more she evades, the more tempting it becomes to design something that finally flushes her out, which is why her eventual death is so unnervingly tidy from their angle. No firestorm, no engineered mutt attack, just a girl who collapses off screen after eating the wrong berries, her body scooped up by a hovercraft. Clean. Quick. A non-performing tribute removed without spending a major spectacle. Here's the real question. In an arena where they can tweak weather, creatures, even hunger itself, how much of that outcome is really hers? Did they subtly starve her toward Peter's stash? Did they zoom in on the nightlock for the audience, already knowing someone would take the bait? Or is the system so powerful that even a tribute built on avoidance gets folded back into the story the second she slips? Because if Foxface was a design anomaly, then her death isn't just a tragedy. It might be the arena quietly correcting an error, and the berries might not be the only thing that was poisoned. So if the game makers saw her as a glitch, what does that make her in the Capitol's eyes? A failed tribute? Or a dangerous idea? Meta moment. Why Suzanne Collins leaves Foxface's death unsolved. In other words, we've hit the point where in-universe logic can only take us so far. If Foxface looks like a glitch in the games, here's the real question. Why does Suzanne Collins never patch it with an answer? Because she could. That part matters because in the rest of the trilogy, Collins is not allergic to clarity. She tells you exactly why Katniss volunteers, why Snow smells of blood and roses, why Finnick is broken, why Coin terrifies you more the longer you sit with her. Trauma is named, motives are spelled out, moral judgment is baked into the narration. So when Foxface dies and all we get is, she must have thought they were safe, that absence feels deliberate. This is where we talk about what ambiguity does to you as a reader. You're forced to pick a lane. Was she careless? Despairing? Brilliant. Whatever you choose, you're revealing what you believe about intelligence, agency, and victimhood in a violent system. Do you think the smart girl from District 5 can't possibly make a basic mistake, so it has to be suicide? Or do you assume anyone who isn't a career is doomed to slip up eventually, so accident is the only reasonable reading? There is a lot to uncover here because Collins is quietly turning the arena camera on us. In the real world, when you hear about a distant tragedy, a protester killed, a refugee boat sinking, a suspect shot while fleeing, you almost never get the full story. You get a headline, a 30-second clip, a cause of death, and then your brain does the Capitol's favorite trick. It fills in the rest. Foxface's death, at face value, is one more line of commentary during the broadcast. We build the narrative around it and feel oddly certain about something we never actually saw explained. And notice how the three main theories each unlock a different reading of the games themselves. If it's an accident, the message is that the arena is pure chaos. No amount of planning can save you from one wrong step, one wrong berry. If it's suicide, The games don't just kill bodies, they destroy hope so thoroughly that a controlled exit feels like the last remaining choice. If she's the smartest tribute, then human ingenuity is bending even the Capital's perfect system, turning their own poisonous symbol into a final, private win. But Collins refuses to crown a winner among those readings, and that refusal might be the point. In a system like Panem's, even the most careful, most observant, most quietly resistant people can disappear into a single sentence. She ate the wrong berries. The Capital flattens a whole person into a cautionary tale, and we're tempted to do the same with our pet theory. So the real horror isn't just how Foxface dies, it's how fast the narrative moves on. And that raises an uncomfortable follow-up. If the story forgets her this quickly, what else is it training you not to see? Alternate timeline. If Foxface survived the berries, who loses instead? So let's break the spell for a second and ask the forbidden what if. What if she doesn't eat the berries? Foxface sees the nightlock for what it is, or just never crosses Peter's path that day. She lives. The games don't pause out of respect. Someone else has to die. Here's the real question. Who becomes the replacement body on the hovercraft, and how far does her particular style of survival actually stretch the system? At face value, you'd assume the arena just corrects itself. The careers are still hunting. Katniss and Peter are still the Capital's favorite relationship experiment, and Rue is already gone. But there is a lot to uncover here once you remember how Foxface operates. She doesn't fight, she edits the battlefield. She shadows, she steals, she waits for other people's bad decisions. So does she eventually have to face the careers directly? Probably not at first. The more realistic path is that she keeps doing what we've already seen, raiding their supplies, tracking their routines, surviving off their excess. That part matters because the career's whole promise to their districts is dominance. Every stolen loaf, every vanished stash quietly undermines that image for the viewers at home. The game makers can't let an invisible tribute keep humiliating their showpiece team forever. This is where we talk about pressure. Once the field narrows, a tribute who never gives the cameras a proper fight becomes a problem. So you can almost feel the arena start to close around her. Mutts driven toward her hiding spots, weather events that flush her out, feast announcements engineered to drag every remaining piece onto the same square. If she's still alive when the cornucopia feast happens, do the careers walk into that scene calmer because they think they've already neutralized the rat, or more paranoid because they haven't? Then there's Katniss and Peter. Would Foxface ever risk an alliance with the star-crossed lovers? The reasonable answer is no. Her entire game is built on never being where the attention is. But imagine a temporary truce, not built on trust, but on math. 3 tributes sharing information to outmaneuver their careers, with the unspoken agreement that it all collapses once the big threats are gone. You can absolutely see her outlasting one of them on pure stealth, especially if Peter's leg injury slows him down and the Capital starts questioning whether their favorite narrative can physically reach the finale. Now picture a final 3 of Katniss, Cato, and Foxface. Suddenly, the Capital's script breaks. It's no longer clean career versus obvious underdog couple. It's a brutal killer, a rebellious archer, and a low-kill mid-tier district girl whose superpower is thinking. What does that say to every kid watching? That you don't have to be the strongest or the Capital's chosen romance to almost win. You just have to treat the games as a system to be hacked. And that's the quiet horror of her early exit. Removing Foxface early keeps the story simple. Keeping her in would have forced the Capital and us to confront a much messier question: what happens when the smartest tribute doesn't conveniently disappear on cue? Was Foxface the only one playing the right game for a rigged system? So if Foxface doesn't disappear on cue, we're stuck with something uncomfortable. What if she's the only one actually playing the right game for a rigged system? To see that, we have to zoom back out to the core mechanics of the games. They're not just about killing kids, they're about manufacturing fear, delivering spectacle, and keeping the districts in a permanent relationship of dependence on the capital. You're supposed to watch, be horrified, and still secretly wonder, what if my child won? What if we got a victor's house, or extra food, or a moment of safety? That promise of reward is the leash. Hope, but on their terms. Most tributes cooperate with that design without ever signing a contract. Careers train their whole lives to become walking content. They enter the arena already branded. The strong, the favorites, the ones the capital can safely root for. Katniss and Peter flip that script, but they're still inside it. They weaponize the romance plot. They play to the cameras. They become the star-crossed lovers the capital can't stop watching. At face value, that's rebellion, but it's also incredibly legible. Easy to package, easy to sell. Foxface is the outlier because she does the opposite. From the cornucopia, she takes a small backpack and vanishes. No grandstand, no slow-motion sprint for the bow. Throughout the games, she steals food, shadows other tributes, memorizes the career's minefield path instead of triggering it. She survives by minimizing her footprint in the system. This is where we talk about refusal, not in a dramatic, down with the capital speech, but in something quieter. She refuses to be a story. And here's the real question. In a game this rigged, isn't that the most rational move? If the arena is designed to turn you into narrative fuel, maybe the smartest strategy isn't to win the spotlight, but to dodge it. Don't give them a love story. Don't give them a heroic last stand. Don't even give them a clear motive. Just be a glitch in the broadcast, a blur at the edge of the frame. That part matters because the capital can control a lot. Rules, mutts, weather, sponsors. But they can't fully control what they can't predict. Foxface's near invisibility is its own form of resistance. She's not a career, not a martyr, not a symbol. She's unreadable. Even her death refuses easy explanation. Accident, suicide, or a final calculated move to deny them a clean narrative. So whether you see her as victim, rebel, or genius, Foxface exposes a truth the capital doesn't want you asking. What if the smartest move is the one that leaves no highlight reel? And if that's true, what does it say about the tribute who does end the games with the most famous highlight of all? Because next, we need to talk about those berries again, and what Foxface's death really changes about how you read Katniss's choice. Hope, fear, and Foxface, what her death says about the capital's control. So when we circle back to those berries, we're not just talking about botany trivia, we're talking about the capital's favorite equation. How much hope can you pump into the games before it turns on you? This is where we talk about President Snow's little TED talk to Seneca Crane. A little hope is effective. A lot of hope is dangerous. At face value, it sounds almost generous. Give the districts a victor. Give them a parade. Give them the promise that maybe if they play along, one of their kids comes home in a crown. But that part matters because it tells you exactly how the arena is calibrated, not just for blood, for balance. Every year, the capital wants terror with a side of possibility. You need enough fear that no district will ever rise up again, but you also need that tiny sliver of, maybe my child will be the one. That's the relationship Victor's village has with the arena, and it's the same relationship Katniss and Peter blow apart. Because when those nightlock berries end up in their hands, the narrative stops being one lucky survivor. Suddenly you have love, defiance, and the possibility of two victors from the same district. That's not a little hope. That's a contagion. You can feel why the capital panics. If two starving kids from 12 can rewrite the rules on live TV, what else might be negotiable? The games stop looking inevitable and start looking negotiable. Now put Foxface next to that. She doesn't generate hope for anyone. No one in District 5 is painting her face on banners. The audience isn't shipping her with anyone. She's not a symbol, she's a rumor. Her whole strategy is private, internal rebellion, refusing to give the cameras a clean story, refusing to fight on their terms, turning the arena into a puzzle instead of a spectacle. Here's the real question. In a system built on televised terror and carefully rationed hope, which tribute is actually more dangerous? The girl who quietly outsmarts the careers, or the girl who turns berries into a proposal and a protest at the same time? From the Capitol's perspective, Foxface is easy to erase. 1,000 invisible acts of quiet resistance don't threaten the broadcast the way one public act of defiance does. So when she dies, the edit is simple. She ate the wrong berries. Tragic. Ironic. Roll the recap. There is a lot to uncover here, because her ambiguous death is a perfect microcosm of how authoritarian systems handle inconvenient people. You don't debate their motives, you flatten them into a consumable story and move on. And that raises a darker question about those berries in Katniss's hand. If Foxface's death can be packaged so neatly, what makes us so sure we understand what the Capitol thought it was seeing when Katniss lifted that handful toward the cameras? So, which theory actually wins? Accident, suicide, or smartest tribute? So when we zoom out from the hovercraft and the berries and the Capitol commentary, we're left with this uncomfortable silence. What actually happened in that clearing with Foxface and Peter's handful of fruit? Accident? Suicide? Or something that doesn't fit neatly into either box? Start with the accident theory, because at face value it's the cleanest. You've got a tribute under extreme stress, running on starvation and adrenaline, who has been outsourcing a key survival skill. She's not foraging, she's shadowing Peter, the boy who can identify edible plants. She sees him pick berries, watches him eat some food from the same stash, and that part matters because it gives her a seemingly rational shortcut. If the baker's son from District 12 is eating from that pile, it must be safe. Human error under pressure is a very believable reason. The weakness? It almost asks you to forget who Foxface has been for the entire games. This is a girl whose entire strategy is risk aversion. She avoids fights, avoids the bloodbath, avoids the careers mines by memorizing a path instead of testing it. Does someone that allergic to unnecessary risk really pop a handful of unknown berries without a second thought? Then there's the suicide theory. This is where we talk about theme, a tribute who refuses to perform in training, who never gives the audience a big emotional breakdown, choosing the one death the cameras can't turn into a spectacle, a quiet collapse in the woods. It lines up with her controlled movements, her refusal to give the games the satisfaction of a chase or a scream. And there is a lot to uncover here about the relationship between control and death in Panem. A self-chosen exit would echo Katniss and Peter's final threat to the games. But here's the real question. Does that really fit her behavior up to that point? She has worked too hard, too cleverly, for too long to stay alive. She steals just enough food, never overreaches, never breaks cover. That sustained survival drive fights against the idea that she simply gives up the first time the odds tighten. So where does the smartest tribute theory land in all this? I actually think it's less a competing explanation and more a lens. Whether her death is accident or intent, everything leading up to it is a masterclass. She turns other tributes into unwitting sponsors, uses the careers hoard, uses Peter's plant knowledge, uses the arena itself as a moving puzzle she can solve. The Capitol may sell her as the silly girl who stole the wrong snack, but if you track her moves scene by scene, she's running one of the most sophisticated games in the field. My own read, and I want to label this clearly as interpretation, is a high-stakes miscalculation by a genius operating under brutal constraints. She sees Peter with the berries, trusts the pattern she's built around him, and this time the pattern is wrong. The Capitol then flattens that into a dumb luck story because it's safer for them if she's foolish rather than formidable. But maybe the most honest answer is that more than one thing can be true. Foxface can be both victim and strategist, both tragic and terrifyingly competent. The ambiguity is not a bug. It's the point. It keeps you asking why the Capitol fears quiet intelligence so much. And it sets up a haunting mirror for the next time someone in the arena lifts a handful of berries and dares the games to decide what that gesture really means. What Foxface changes about how we watch the Hunger Games, and once you see that, you can't really watch the 74th Games the same way again. On a rewatch, Foxface stops being the girl with the berries and turns into a ghost in the machine. You start tracking her the way the careers track prey. Where is she in the cornucopia rush? Why does the camera cut away just as she slips out with a single backpack and no weapon? At face value, she's background, but once you're looking, she's everywhere the lens almost notices and then doesn't. Revisit the pyramid scene. The edit tells you this is about Cato's temper and Katniss's arrow. But here's the real question. Why is the most brilliant move in that whole sequence a silent girl in red memorizing a minefield pattern in seconds and vanishing with an armful of food? There is a lot to uncover here, because once you clock that, every wide shot becomes suspicious. Is that a random blur in the trees? Or is District 5's tribute running her own private games just outside the Capitol's frame? And that part matters, because it forces you to notice who the cameras don't care about. The tributes with no sponsors, no sob story packages, no dramatic deaths that can be replayed at parties in the Capitol. Foxface is the one we catch in the act, but you start to wonder how many other kids were playing quiet, careful strategies that never made it onto Caesar Flickerman's highlight reel. How many died off screen, reduced to a cannon blast and a name on a sky with no explanation? This is where we talk about our relationship with media outside Panem. Which deaths become headlines, which victims get a week of analysis, and which get a single sentence. Cause of death? Age? Maybe a city if they're lucky. The games are just a more honest version of something we already know. Storytellers choose whose pain is profitable. Foxface, flattened into Barry's girl, is a perfect example of how an entire human can be edited down to a quirky cause of death. So the question becomes, what do you do with that gap? Do you accept the surface explanation the narrative hands you, oops, she messed up? Or do you start digging into the silences? Foxface turns into a test of how deeply you're willing to look. Are you watching the show the Capitol made? Or are you reading the negative space, the off-screen hours where the real games are happening? Once you read her that way, the whole series sharpens. Every official story starts to feel negotiable. Rue's death, Fresh's disappearance, even Haymitch's backstory. What parts were curated for maximum impact, and what got buried because it hinted at a threat the Capitol couldn't spin. We're going to cover how that suspicion pays off later, but Foxface is the invitation. She proves intelligence doesn't always arrive in a flaming chariot with a rebellion speech. Sometimes it's a girl darting through the frame, stealing food, memorizing patterns, and reminding you that the smartest tribute might be the one the broadcast barely shows at all. Your turn. Verdict time on Foxface's final move. So now that we've tracked her slipping through the arena's blind spots, it comes down to you. When you picture Foxface reaching for those berries, what do you believe she thought was going to happen next? Not in abstract, in that exact second. Hand out. Stomach empty, cameras watching. At face value, the scene plays fast. She spots Peter's haul, darts in, grabs a handful, eats, and drops. But here's the real question. In your headcanon, is that a pure accident, a quiet suicide, or the smartest tribute 4D chess move the game's ever buried under Katniss's bigger story? There is a lot to uncover here, and this is where we talk about you choosing a side. If you're on Team Accident, tell me why. Do you think she just miscalculated, assuming Peter couldn't possibly poison his own food? Do you read her as so starved, so exhausted, that her puzzle brain finally failed? If that's your verdict, drop your favorite piece of evidence from the book or the movie. Is it the way Katniss only realizes it's Nightlock after Foxface dies? Is it the hovercraft confirmation? What detail seals it for you? If you lean suicide, what pushed her there? Was it the moment she realized every remaining tribute outmuscled her? Do you think she recognized Nightlock by name, maybe from District 5's tech and agriculture knowledge, and chose a fast death rather than being hunted for sport on the broadcast? Point to the line, the shot, the expression that makes you sure she knew. And if you're in the smartest tribute camp, I want to hear that too. Do you think she suspected the berries were dangerous, but accepted the risk as a last calculated gamble? Maybe she's betting the Capitol won't let two star-crossed lovers die to the same poison. Maybe she's forcing the narrative into a corner before Katniss ever does. If that's your theory, what's the strongest reason you see her move as strategy instead of surrender? You don't have to pick a clean box either. Maybe she didn't fully know, but she had a bad feeling. Maybe she clocked that something was off with Peter's foraging, but hunger and the pressure of the games pushed her into a half-informed risk. That part matters because it changes our relationship to her death. Is it random cruelty or the result of a brutal cost-benefit equation she's been running since the cornucopia? Use specific prompts. Do you think the game makers had already noticed her as a threat, shadowing the careers and never triggering their traps? If she'd lived one more day, who do you honestly think she would have outlasted? Thresh? Peter? Even Cato, if the Mutts and the Capitol's need for a spectacle had shifted slightly. We're going to cover one more angle that might change your verdict. But before we get there, I'm reading those theories carefully. The sharpest, most well-argued takes might end up in a future Foxface fan theory court episode, or even a deep dive into another tribute the broadcast barely showed at all. And the twist waiting in that next angle might make you rethink which side you just chose. From Foxface to the rest of the arena, who should we overanalyze next? So if Foxface can generate this much debate from a handful of scenes and a bowl of poisoned berries, what does that say about everyone the broadcast barely bothered to show you? This is where we talk about the rest of the arena's ghosts. Because Foxface isn't the only tribute whose story feels bigger than their screen time. Think about Thresh for a second. At face value, he's the big, strong grain kid from District 11 who lives in the fields and smashes a skull with a rock. But here's the real question. What kind of moral code makes a tribute spare Katniss's life in the middle of the games, then walk back into the storm knowing the careers will come for him? There is a lot to uncover here about honor, debt, and how District 11 raises its kids to think about justice. Then you have Clove. The Capitol's edit frames her as the knife girl with rage issues. Sharp, cruel, done. But if we slow that footage down and do a Clove-centric read, what does career culture look like from inside? What's the relationship between a girl trained from childhood to kill and the promise of becoming a victor, a District 2 celebrity, a future mentor? Does she actually believe in the games, or is she just the most fluent in the language of violence the Capitol taught her? And we haven't even touched the morphlings. The Capitol turns them into punchlines, drugged-out former victors from 6 who wander around covered in paint. But why are 2 people who already won the games so broken that they'd rather disappear into hallucinations than live in their victors' village mansions? One of them dies, shielding Peter. That part matters because it hints at a whole arc of regret, exploitation, and maybe the only kind of redemption the arena allows. Pattern interrupt. the District 3 boy. You remember him? The quiet tech kid who rewires the career's entire supply trap and turns the cornucopia into a minefield. The broadcast treats him as a plot device. But what happens if we give him the Foxface treatment and ask why a district that makes electronics keeps producing tributes who understand the game's code better than the game makers expect? So here's what we're going to cover in future episodes if you want it. A full breakdown of Thresh's moral logic and what it reveals about District 11. A deep dive into Clove as the purest product of career training and what her death says about the capital's promise to its favoured districts. A District 3 tech keyed analysis that mirrors what we did for District 5, and Foxface, how you fight the games not with force, but with system knowledge. Which tribute, which district, which background extra of Panem do you want us to overanalyze next? Tell us. Treat the comments as a programming poll the capital doesn't control. Because the bigger mission on this channel isn't just rerunning Katniss's highlight reel, it's fixing the capital's edit. We're trying to give screen time back to the stories that got cut, censored, or turned into one-line archetypes. And if you stick around, you're not just watching breakdowns, you're joining an ongoing project to rewrite who the games were really about. In the next section, we'll pull all of this back to Foxface one last time. And there's one more twist in her story that might change how you see every tribute we just mentioned. Stay alive, remember the berries. Final thoughts and farewell. So we've circled all the way around the arena, through theories and half-glimpsed scenes, and we end up back with one girl who barely speaks on screen. At face value, Foxface is the tribute who plays the quietest game and dies the quietest death. No grand speech, no cannon shot close-up, no sobbing mentor. Just a body in the grass and a handful of berries. But here's the real question. How does someone that silent end up being the key to understanding how the games really work? When you track her from the cornucopia, grabbing a small pack and vanishing instead of fighting, to the careers pyramid, where she solves their minefield by memory instead of muscle, there is a lot to uncover here. She is the tribute who refuses the script. No alliances, no dramatic showdown, just this relentless decision to stay in the background of every frame. The arena is supposed to reward spectacle, but her whole strategy is anti-spectacle. And that part matters because it's exactly why her death won't sit still. Accident, suicide, or 4D chess. Whichever theory you lean toward, the fact that we're still arguing about it years later means the capital never fully pinned her down. They could name her Foxface, cut her training score, and edit her screen time, but they could not lock in one clean narrative about what those berries meant in her hand. That's a crack in the system. The games depend on clear stories, brave career, tragic underdog, star-crossed lovers. Foxface slips between those roles. If she miscalculated, the smartest tribute made a fatal mistake that exposes how impossible perfect control really is. If she chose those berries, then a girl from District 5 turned the capital's own weapon into a quiet refusal. If she was playing some deeper game we can't fully see, it proves you can't always measure threat by who's loudest on the training floor. So here's where we talk about the image that survives. Every time you see Katniss lift those nightlock berries at the finale, the moment that's supposed to be the capital's ultimate propaganda glitch, remember the girl who fell first. Off to the side of the frame. No speech, no deal with Seneca Crane, just a question mark the cameras couldn't resolve. Ask yourself, what game did she think she was playing? Was she trying to win, trying to escape, or trying to make sure that somewhere down the line, someone in another district would stop and wonder why her story doesn't fit? If this kind of deep dive into one background moment made the Hunger Games feel new again, consider sharing this with a friend who still argues about which tribute was actually the smartest, or sticking around with us so we can keep poking holes in the capital's narrative together. Stay alive, remember the berries, and we'll see you in the next arena.